in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Lisa Lee. She is the VP of Global Culture and Belonging at DoorDash. Lisa, how's your day going?
Good. How is your day going?
It's good. I'm excited to chat with you. I have a bunch of questions, but if you want to start from the beginning and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and be sure to include your pronouns. And always like to ask the question, when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Lee, and thank you so much for having me on this show, I guess. And like you said, I lead global culture and belonging here at DoorDash. Let's see, how do I answer this question? Well, first, I should say that my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And there were a number of things that I wanted to be when I was growing up. The first is definitely wanted to be a ballerina. And it's because I was actually classically trained for a couple of years growing up. So really thought that that was going to be my path. And then I think after that, I wanted to do, some really funky things. I wanted to be like an airline ticket, like issuer. If you remember back in the days, and this is not to date myself or anything, when your tickets would actually be issued by somebody like typing on a keyboard, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And, my dad got me a typewriter and I thought that was what I wanted to be. And then of course, just also a teacher. I love teaching all of my stuffed animals things growing up. So definitely had many, many career aspirations at a young age.
I love that. They're very creative answers and outside of the box, not your typical responses. If you fast forward to now, you have a career of a lot of experiences at high growth companies in diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, company culture. How do you think your personal journey has really led you up into this point to lead the culture and belonging team, specifically at DoorDash?
Yeah, I love this question because it really gets people to think about all of the steps that we have taken in order to get us to where we are today. So, hopefully living a life of no regrets. But I would say sort of three big milestones in my career that has led me to this point. The first is that my family, so I was born and raised in Taiwan. And at the age of 9, my family immigrated to South Africa. And in my teenage years, we then moved to the United States in California. So I think growing up as what I would call a third culture kid, being exposed to so many different cultures and people and histories really opened my eyes to diverse perspectives, as well as the value that comes with it. I always tell people, in some ways, I was kind of raised by, Black women, and all of my, close friends growing up, the people who taught me the most were, people from that community. So I think it's no accident that, in today's world and in my career, I'm constantly talking about the value of what you get when you surround yourself with people who don't think like you. And then the second thing is when I went to college, I was a theater major, and I really thought that being in the arts was what I wanted to do. And I was actually a part of this Asian American theater group when I was in college. And again, I went into college thinking that I knew a lot and I knew what I wanted to do with my life. But then meeting this group of fantastic individuals who looked like me, but knew so much more about the world. I mean, these were people my age, but so worldly, so progressive. It made me really want to learn and get out of my own bubble. So that was definitely another turning point of understanding, potentially inequities. I went into theater thinking that it was going to be this thing that allowed me to express my own emotions. I was pretty shy, growing up, and being on stage allowed me to kind of really open up, right, and take on different characters. But then being a part of this theater group helped me to see the social and political aspect behind how theater and art can really help shape and influence somebody's perspective. And then the third thing is when I started working at Facebook and really seeing the way that products were built from the inside, it gave me that front row seat to say, okay, if these are the people, right, including myself, inside a company that is getting to make, these really important decisions, and we don't have, all of the viewpoints here that could help us to make better decisions,
Mhm.
that's going to be a problem, especially given the impact that tech has or had, I guess, has in our world today. So all of those things, I think, has step by step really led me to seeing how diversity, equity, and inclusion, and culture, and belonging became, my life's calling.
I love that. It sounds a lot of which is rooted in lived and learned experiences, something that we talk a lot about on this show as well. And it sounds like the work is deeply purposeful and you're passionate about this as well as you're talking through your journey to this work. And I know there's also a school of thought of just love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. And passion driven work, from your experience and perspective, do you believe that folks need to love and be passionate about what they do in order to be successful in their careers?
I think this is a hard question for me, and I'll tell you why. I think that in order for you to be able to have all of those things, love and passion for your job, and to have the financial responsibility that some people may have to deal with in their lives, I think that balance is never easy, and I think we have all been there. A lot of us have, where we've had to take on jobs because we simply had to,
Mhm.
right? And not everyone is afforded, I think, the privilege to be able to think about love for your job and passion for your job. But what I will say though is it will wear on you over time, right? Even I appreciate you saying that it seems like my work is very purposeful. There are definitely days, and there have been days where I didn't want to get out of bed because this work is emotional. It is personal, and it can be difficult. So what I try to tell people is you do have to find the thing, or the things in your job that do really drive you. And hopefully those things are happening more often than not. So one of the things that I love to talk to my team about in career check-ins is, tell me what you love about your job, or what aspects of what you do in your role today that really gives you energy, and what are the things that really take energy away from you, and how can we shift the paradigm a little bit more to doing more of the things that give you energy, and then try to take away some of the things that give you less energy. But some of the things that I think we're challenged by sometimes are detail orientation, and organization, and multitasking, balancing so many different like projects and etc. And that unfortunately is never going to go away, I think, right? In kind of a corporate structure, we always have to be really buttoned up and organized in how it is that we approached our work, because that will make our jobs easier. And for the people that really dislike those aspects about their job, for me, I try to teach people, how can we get smarter about those things, instead of feeling like I just need to go find a job where those things don't exist. And I'm like, I don't know if that's really realistic. But definitely, like, I want people to think about what gives you energy at the end of the day, because that could be a good gauge of whether or not you're in the right, at least in the right industry, in the right field.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good reflection point as well, and a conversation to have with your manager and your team as well, those moments of flow and what you enjoy doing, and also the things that you could improve on or the things that you enjoy less. I think another point of reflection, especially since you've been in the space for over 15 years, is how have you seen really diversity, equity, and inclusion change? I know there's been, over this past year, especially with the anti-racism movement and corporate social responsibility for companies being at the forefront. Have you seen any like positive changes in terms of resourcing or anything that we should be wary of there?
I've definitely seen a lot of positive changes. And I should say, when you said, 15 plus years, I was like, wow, has it been that long? But You know, I have to I have to say that while I am very optimistic about some of the changes that I have seen, um, I would also be remiss not to say that I don't think the changes are coming fast enough,
Mhm.
right? So, in some ways, the conversations that we are having about diversity, equity, and inclusion are really not that different from what we were saying 10, 15 years ago. You know, we are still, I think, as an industry, struggling with women, non-binary people, and underrepresented people of color in leadership roles, in board of directors, and so on. But you know, some of the things that do, I think, um, make me feel positive about our future is one, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion used to be very much about recruiting,
Yeah.
right? If you don't have, you know, um, these kinds of people at your company, it's a recruiting problem. And I think that has shifted over time to now be more about conversations around upward mobility,
Mhm.
promotions, advancement, and ultimately retention. You know, what are you doing to ensure that people in your company want to stay here? You know, the conversation has also very, I think, naturally shifted to incorporate inclusion. And there's broader understanding now that diversity is not the same as inclusion. And in fact, they should go hand in hand together. And then, of course, the introduction of equity too, you know, that sometimes having an equitable outcome requires you to have unequal inputs. And I think that is a concept that I think is still quite uncomfortable for people, because I think in many ways we have all grew up with, the teachings that, if you get one candy, the other person get one candy. This is how it's fair, right? And we know that because of historical context and exclusions and laws that have made it really impossible for people to have equal access.
Mhm.
Sometimes, again, we have to think about unequal inputs in order for us to get to equitable outcomes. So I would say those two are probably, the biggest shifts that I have seen. And I'm very, very happy that there's broader understanding now, but still, I think that, um, it's not all that rare that I would get questions that is still very much rooted in ignorance sometimes. And given a lot of the conversations that's happening in the higher ed and education space, I do think it's very important for us as a country and as a society to continue teaching our history, so that we understand how it is that we got to where we are today, and then where do we go from here.
Absolutely. I think especially what you're talking about in terms of intentionality and diversity not being just rooted in talent attraction and recruitment, it's just one piece of the puzzle. Internal mobility, promotion, equitable compensation is all part of retaining folks once they get in the door, and really promoting them as well and actively listening to where they want to go in their careers too. And I want to shift a little bit to kind of your specific strategy at DoorDash when you're thinking about all of these pieces. How would you describe those pillars of DoorDash's culture and belonging strategy?
Sure. Yeah. And I think it'd be helpful for me to talk about, what exactly do I get to take care of under the broader umbrella of culture and belonging. So, in my work, I essentially have three legs of the same stool, is what I call it. On one side, I have employee engagement,
Mhm.
which is internal comms and employee connections. It's what we call our employee experience team. And then I have employer brand and recruitment marketing. And then the last bucket is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these three pillars really come together very nicely to work on some of the areas that sometimes I think are not directly impacting an employee's day-to-day experience, right? So, that's your manager, that's your direct line of leadership and the work that you do every day. But the teams that I get to oversee are ones that I think are especially influential in the dressing, around those things, right? So one way that I've described this to people before is, if an employee's journey in a company is them working on this, like, beautiful pavement, and going about their day, the work that my team does is one, I think, really making sure that the roads are paved and even, there are no potholes, and that on their journey, they get to look at, a beautiful park with trees and flowers, and it's the entire conditions under which people work. Um, and we have a bit of a decentralized model here at DoorDash. And what I mean by that is so much of what we do, I think, is about uh, one, incubating things within my team, trying things out and seeing if something will work. And then our goal is to give it away, and give it away to the teams that should own that thing. So, for example, we have somebody on our team right now who is working on diversity recruiting enablement. So how do we support our recruiting partners in helping them, better understand how to mitigate bias during the recruiting process? And our hope is that once, we have determined a strategy and approach, and our partners on the recruiting side are, doing that particular practice, we then say, great, now do it in perpetuity, like incorporate it into your best practice.
Yeah.
And, then that frees up my team's time to then continue to look at other areas of improvement. And we try to do this, throughout everything that we do. So we're really trying to change both, an individual and our own capacity to transform and change, but as well as looking at things on a system, wide level.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of systemic change that needs to happen, I think when you off kind of load or just like empower folks to work on projects like this, you're focusing on ownership and accountability, and really creating long-term change. Like you said, in terms of belonging and company culture, it can really be hard to measure, especially as you're expanding your team and strategies are changing all of the time. And I know you've worked at larger companies like Facebook and Squarespace and now DoorDash. How do you think about really measuring the impact of the programs around the three pillars that you mentioned, and really work to ensure that people feel like they belong at a company throughout their journey at DoorDash?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We talk so much about metrics of success here at DoorDash, and I think it's one of the things that has allowed us to be, successful in what we do. I will say that there's so many measurements that we look at, but taking a bit of a step back at the macro level, how I think about our progress, I think really falls within three areas. The first is look. The second is feel, and then the third is business impact. So the look is, as you can imagine, it's very much about what do we look like, right? And it sometimes is, yes, it's the workforce demographic data that you put out in a diversity report, but it's also very much about when I'm walking in an office, do I count the number of underrepresented people of color that I see, right? Like you can, I think, very much look at your team, look at the people who are sitting in your pod, and have an understanding of how you're doing when it comes to your overall diversity. So I never want people and leaders to feel paralyzed by the fact that sometimes data is not always readily available, but that shouldn't stop you from trying to increase diversity on your team and your organization. The second is feel, and that is our employee survey scores, where we look at how employees feel about being included as a part of their team, how they feel about all kinds of things, ranging from confidence in leadership, whether or not people feel like they're able to do the best work of their careers, and we cut that data set by gender, by race and ethnicity, by a whole bunch of different parameters to help us understand where there might be deltas in terms of different communities and their experiences within DoorDash. And then the third, when it comes to business impact, this is very much about, who are the people at our company that have a seat at the table that is making critical business decisions. So you can do really well in the look, you can do really well in the feel, and then you can have the same 20, cis white men who are over 6 feet tall, sitting in a room making all of the decisions for a company, right? So that is one very critical component that we look at. Part of what we do at DoorDash is, we have very rigorous planning cycles to help us determine, sprints and direction of the company. And we look at, the demographic data within our planning pods as well to measure that last bit around advancement, upward mobility, and then also who has a seat at the table to be able to really represent diverse perspectives to our executive team. But yeah, I think that outside of those three buckets, again, there are always interesting metrics for us to look at that help us, I think, get 1% better every day to understand, how it is that we're doing and progressing in all of these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the pieces that you mentioned in terms of qualitative data, asking employees how they feel specifically around the programs and just strategies you're putting forth is really important. And you mentioned data a few times in terms of the employee survey and asking employees for that feedback. Can you dig in a little bit more and share with our audience what a holistic strategy for employee engagement and really employee listening looks like on your team and at DoorDash at large?
Sure. So we work very closely with our talent management organization that also has our people programs team, and they drive some of the things like employee voice surveys and employee listening, and we continue to. I think iterate on how it is that we do that. What kinds of data points do we get from people, how often, and I think more importantly, what do we do with that information? And I think one of the challenges that I've seen with organizations in the past is we spend a lot of time gathering the information and cutting the information, that by the time it's time to do something with that data, it doesn't seem like we're moving necessarily like fast enough before the next round comes up, right? So I think that's something that I would encourage companies to get better in, which is how do we all continue to be more nimble in the way that we're thinking about short-term solutions and long-term solutions. My team works closely with our partners in that regard, and then outside of, again, I think one of the things that I talk about is we try not to be bogged down with data, in the sense that data is not always readily available, but that shouldn't stop you from we hire amazing, I think we all hire really amazing people that bring with them experiences that they've had in their careers. And even without the experiences, a lot of people have their instincts, right? They're really intuitive about what needs to be done. And at the end of the day, everybody on my team is also an employee.
Mhm.
So, what I try to have my employee engagement team work on is we set, our strategy at the beginning of the year, and on a quarterly basis, we also go through a very rigorous planning process to say, okay, based on obviously the hard data that we have, we also are employee ambassadors, in which we're hearing things all the time. We are a part of our employee resource groups. We are the ones that are leading that program. We are in the Slack channels. We are, basically finding multiple ways to hear what employees have to tell us. What do we do with that information? And then where do we start to, I think, place big bets into some of the things that we know will definitely, I think, increase employee engagement and help people to feel that sense of belonging. And then let's just continue to experiment, right? Let's try something. Let's, get the feedback and let's, pivot, be ready to pivot if we need to. But we don't always need, sort of the full like graphs and charts and the deep analysis to tell us what we need to do.
Absolutely. You need to be able to act. And that's also how you build trust with employees too. If they give that feedback and then nothing is done about it, or it takes a little longer, like you were talking about too, and they might be a little bit hesitant to share that as well. And there are a multitude of ways, whether it's anecdotally or captured in a survey or anything like that, to get the voice of the employee and see what their thoughts and and feelings are there. I know we've discussed in terms of equity, this could be seen throughout manifesting the organization in a multitude of ways outside of recruitment. There's also social impact, and I know there's an entire team that does that at DoorDash as well. But I wanted to ask, from your perspective, how do you ensure that your social impact work, which is incredible, is also aligned with your diversity, equity, and inclusion values or the pillars that you talked about?
Yeah, so we work very closely too with our social impact team. I mean, they're fantastic, and one of the things that I have always felt very thankful for is that our vision has been so aligned. I've definitely been at companies and I have seen this where the social impact initiatives are um, not not lined up with what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about, and that can be, a challenge. So, not only do we talk fairly often, but we also, give each other feedback and try to better understand, hey, we just signed with this particular partner. Why did we decide to go with this partner as opposed to, these other organizations, right? And I think, working closely in that way and leading from a place of curiosity to better understand how decisions are made, that then, gives me and my team the connection points to say, hey, here's some of the things that we're working on, on my team. I feel like there might be opportunities for us to partner together on this thing. But, I think that with DoorDash's mission and vision of empowering local economies, having that North Star set, at the very top level has really helped all of us to, align in the same direction. Because I think we all agree that from a social impact perspective, from diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then just broader culture, we are not going to be able to really empower local economies if we can't empower the people and the systems within those economies. So therefore, everything that we do, from our two teams have been, I think, have been informed, by that. And therefore, the crossovers between our team have been very organic.
I think that that's great. And a lot of what we're talking about is strategic decisions that really impact folks at a company and also the communities and the ecosystem that you're talking about as well. And it sounds like you're working on, and you and your team are working on a lot of different projects. And especially in this work, it can be emotionally draining, and it takes a lot, especially if you are really passionate about the work as well. And you're a leader at the company, and I'm sure that you help manage people leaders as well. And over this past year, we've seen so many changes in how you measure effective leadership. In your opinion, what are some great guidelines to measure that, from people managers to C-suite executives?
One of the scores that we look at as part of our employee engagement survey is actually what we call manager effectiveness.
Okay.
And we have done surveys that have specifically focused on manager effectiveness. And I'll say, it wasn't always something that the company looked at. DoorDash just turned 8 years old this year, which is pretty wild. And, like many hyper growth companies that went from startup to, a fully formed company, a lot of the times, we tend to have managers who may be a little bit younger in their career and a little bit more, inexperienced when it comes to leading a large team and people. So we've done a ton of work to really place an emphasis and importance on, don't just be good at what you do in your job. You also have to think about your success as the success of your team, right? And vice versa. So this score is something that, we have now put into place. And we look at manager effectiveness, and we do, subsequent coaching and, determination of, whether or not somebody actually really wants to be a people manager. Maybe, they feel like they've had to take on this people leadership role, even though it's not the thing that gives them energy, because it's a thing that would move their careers along. So better understanding how people are motivated has been important. And I think for me, you know, obviously, I think this last year of living, in this global pandemic has been very, very difficult for so many people. And the best people managers that I have seen are ones that are able to really, I think, have a deep compassion for the folks that they have on their team, and are able to think very creatively about, okay, we obviously have, some very real constraints in all of our lives that we are challenged by. At the end of the day, we're still one team. So how do we work together to accomplish the goals that we have, and also make it psychologically safe for people to share, how they're feeling, the concerns that they have, and whether or not we are, I think, uh, moving about, our goals in the best and the smartest way. So I think that listening and having empathy, and then frankly being vulnerable too. I know that that word gets thrown around more nowadays, but I think as a leader, your team naturally, I think, will build more trust with you when they see you as a full human being as well. And at the end of the day, I am also another human being that has been impacted, by the global pandemic. So how do I talk to my team about some of the challenges that I am facing in my personal life, and allow my team to lean in and help me? That can be a really scary thing for leaders. But I think effective leadership is one in which those things are, what we do or we try to do. And we ask our teams to hold ourselves accountable for when we are not living up to those values.
Absolutely. I think that internal work of how am I going to show up and be vulnerable for the team, modeling that behavior and just having that two-way conversation is really important. I know we have talked about how you've seen the industry change in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but in terms of belonging and the culture space, I wanted to ask your opinion as a thought leader in the space of, what is something that you think companies and individuals really need to include in their strategy to be successful in this future of work that we're building together?
Hmm. I think that some of the things that we all need to continue to do, and I know that so many of us, just speaking to my peers in the space, um, I think what we're all trying to do is continuing to look at potential blockages
Mhm.
when it comes to advancement. And I think getting really surgical about that. I do think that one of the things that's really interesting about the future of work and potentially remote work, whether it's 100% or it's a hybrid model, um, what I love about it is that it removes some of the barriers in the past around FaceTime, right? And that you have to, I think, be physically seen in an office, maybe, burning the midnight oil in order for you to, exactly, the perception, the optics that you are working really hard. So therefore, you deserve to be seen and recognized. So hopefully that levels the playing field a little bit. I think that one of the things that we can all be more like cognizant of is uh, the hybrid model that I am expecting and seeing is going to be uh, different for every team.
Mhm.
So I think for the teams that do, require, whether it's 100% in office, or for the teams that are 100% remote, how do you build into your system and your structure the opportunities for people to continue to engage and build what has been called both strong ties as well as weak ties. So weak ties is something that's like spontaneous conversations that you have with people, at the water cooler, or conversations with people that have moved to a different team, but you maintain sort of a peer mentorship relationship, right? That's kind of a weak tie. And as we all kind of take on different models of future of work, I think it's important for teams like mine to think about programs and initiatives that tries to level the playing field a little bit for people who may not have the access to those things as readily available as other people, because there is so much value to be derived from those kinds of conversations and learnings that can come out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of people that are really passionate about helping move this work forward and really look into internal processes and help make change and systemic change at their company as well. But maybe they don't have a lot of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the people space, in recruiting as well. Do you have any advice for people who are interested in getting into equity work and they're looking to make an impact?
Sure. I think one of the things that I try to tell people, because I do get that question a lot,
Yeah.
and while I love the energy and the excitement, I do think that, as with all things, the grass is a little greener on the other side. And what I try to tell people is, you do not have to be in a D&I role for you to have an impact starting tomorrow.
Mhm.
In the work that you do, if you are, let's say, somebody who works on social media marketing, if you are somebody who works, on our sales team, or if you're somebody who works, in our customer support, customer experience team, you can already bring in, that perspective to your existing teams, to your manager. One, for example, looking at the diversity of your immediate team and
Mhm.
having the conversation with your manager and your teammates about, hey, it seems like we are only maybe hiring, the same kind of people who all come from potentially, X school,
Right.
or are coming from X consulting company. How do we think about diversity and the value of diversity on this particular team, and how can we all be more intentional in the way that we're hiring, right? Or in the particular work that you do, let's say take the social media marketing, as an example. Who are the people that you're giving a platform to, right? Are you going to the same employees or the same speakers or the same, thought leaders, to quote them on what's happening with our business, as opposed to finding more diverse voices within a company in which you can give more of that visibility and platform to somebody who, is not the same go-to. And so I encourage people and I challenge people to really, in your day to day, think about the ways in which you can make an impact today. And that, know that your voice is already a powerful one,
Mhm.
and that your voice and the feedback that you have for your manager and for your leadership, is, seen as valuable, and that you do not have to wait for, let's say, an open role on my team, to then say, hey, I'm really interested in this. And I'll say too, I'll finish it off by saying, I love internal mobility. It's one of the things that I uh, am always so excited about when I can find amazing talent within my own company, and say, you already know the culture, you already know, you already know the experience of what it's like being an employee here. So you have a lot of value to add to my team. Now, tell me, what have you done to really, I think, move the needle when it comes to culture and belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion in your day to day. And
Mhm.
the best kind of candidates, I'll tell you, are the ones that have examples for me.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh, I've been able to do this or try this. And here's what I've learned. Here's what didn't go well. So if you are interested in getting into the DEI field, or any of the teams that I have talked about, that's under my umbrella, that is the best way to show and demonstrate that you have a passion for this work, even outside of your day-to-day responsibilities.
You can start tomorrow. I love that because there are
Yeah.
ways that you can ask yourselves these questions about your team, about your company. And you're right, people do have a voice. And I think it's a lot of responsibility for just like a DEI team, program manager, chief diversity officer, what have you, to have their whole job be like it's their responsibility to make the company equitable. It's everybody's kind of ownership and accountability there. And for folks who are especially interested in moving into a more formal role, I love that advice. I can ask you questions probably for a couple more hours, but I know we are closing out our time together. But as we end our conversation, always like to ask if there's anything I didn't ask that you want to share with the audience, or just a key takeaway that you hope people take with them after our conversation.
I'll probably just end by saying that the work that we talked about today is not easy. It's not easy, and there are going to be ebbs and flows to your progress, and it's not a reason to stop trying. And what I try to say is that if it were easy, if it were just another sort of product fit, challenge, maybe, we would have all figured it out now. And what we're all working on is, frankly, against so many of our human like biases that, we have developed, over centuries. We are working against systems that have been built also, from years and years of development, right? So don't give up. This work can feel really tiring, and really try to again lean in from a place of curiosity, because we really have to hear each other and better understand all of our different perspectives in order for us to achieve the same, or like the same outcome, or going in the same direction. So all that's to say is, don't give up. It's going to be hard, but this work is so fulfilling and so rewarding. And I am just so excited that DoorDash has been able to make the kind of investment and have seen the progress over the last couple of years that I've been here.
Yes, I think that is really exciting to measure the progress and continually iterate on your strategy. Lisa Lee, thank you so much for the work that you have done and are doing in this space, and for being on the interview series today. I enjoyed meeting you and our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And for our listeners, as a reminder, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of all employees to speak up, and we know that it's a requirement for the company to succeed. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.